The mountain did not care about them. That was the first thing Lieutenant Daniel Rourke understood when he stepped outside the command tent at 0430 hours and the wind hit him like a wall of broken glass. Visibility: 4 meters, maybe 5 if the gusts paused. The peaks above forward operating base Kestrel had vanished 3 days ago behind a curtain of white that moved and breathed like something alive, something deliberate. The satellites couldn't see through it, the drones wouldn't fly in it. The radio signals bounced off the valley walls and returned as noise. FOB Kestrel was alone. 41 personnel. A command tent, 6 shelter tents, a medical bay that was really just a reinforced pop-up with a diesel heater that ran on prayers. They were dug into a ridge at 4,200 meters, perched above a valley that 3 days ago had been a supply corridor and was now a killing field. Rourke went back inside. Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the map table with his arms crossed, jaw set, eyes moving across the topographical lines like he could read something new into them if he stared long enough. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, gray at the temples, the kind of officer who had earned his rank through 2 decades of forward deployments rather than Pentagon corridors. He did not tolerate uncertainty well. He treated it like a personal insult. "Hawkins," he said without looking up. Sergeant First Class Tom Hawkins materialized from the corner. "Sir, tell me something useful." "Still nothing from the valley floor, sir. Last confirmed position of the sniper was approximately—" "I know the last confirmed position. I want the current position." Hawkins said nothing. There was no current position. There was only the absence of sound before a shot, and then the shot. 3 dead in 48 hours. Sergeant Yolanda Price, picked off during a perimeter check at dawn. Corporal James Ferris, taking a leak 20 meters from the tent line. And yesterday, Rourke still felt it in the back of his throat. Captain Vincent Aldrich, who had been walking between tents with his head down, body armor on, doing everything right, when a round came through the storm and found the one gap between his collar and his jaw. 3 shots, 3 kills. No muzzle flash visible. No sound signature that could be pinned to a direction. The storm ate everything. Rourke was standing near the tent entrance when the flap moved. He assumed it was Corporal Deshaun Morris, who was supposed to relieve the perimeter watch. He did not look up immediately. "Close the flap behind you," he said. "You're letting the—" He looked up. She was not Morris. She was small, genuinely small. Not in the way soldiers sometimes looked small before they proved otherwise, but physically, structurally slight, as if she had been built for a different purpose than this. 5'4" at most. Dark hair pulled back hard, a civilian parka that had seen better years, patched at the left shoulder with duct tape. She carried a medical bag, bright red cross on white, the kind that aid organizations used over one shoulder, and a smaller pack on her back. She looked at the map table without expression. "Who authorized this?" Webb said. He said it quietly, which was worse than if he'd shouted. "She came up the north face, sir," said Rourke, though he was only guessing. The north face was the only route not in the sniper's observable arc. It was also 2,000 meters of exposed scree and ice in a whiteout. "You walked up the north face," Webb said. It was not a question. The woman set her medical bag down near the entrance. "I heard you needed trauma support. What we need," Webb said, "is a sniper team and a medevac window. Are you either of those things?" "No." "Then sit down somewhere and stay out of the way." She did not sit down. She moved toward the map table, slowly, not confrontationally, the way you might move toward a stove to check whether the burner was on. She looked at the topographical overlay. She looked at the red-circled positions where Aldrich, Price, and Ferris had been hit. She looked at the valley elevation markers. She did not touch anything. "Who's in charge of medical?" she said. "Specialist Greaves," Rourke said. "But he's handling—" "I'll find him." She picked up her bag and moved toward the back of the tent. Webb watched her go. His expression did not change. "Find out how she got up here," he said to Rourke, "and keep her out of my way." Her name, as far as anyone could determine, was Claire. No last name offered. No ID beyond a volunteer credential from a European humanitarian organization that Rourke could not verify without satellite uplink. She was 29, maybe 30. Specialist Greaves, who was 22 and had the earnest efficiency of someone who'd trained hard and was now being asked to use all of it at once, accepted her help without complaint. She was good with the wounded. Better than good, she worked with the economy of someone who had done this before, in conditions worse than this. Corporal Aguilar had a fractured wrist from a fall during the perimeter scramble the first day of the storm. She said it with the casual confidence of someone who has dealt with the same injury a dozen times. splinted it with materials from her bag and a strip of tent-pole padding that she asked for without explanation, and told Aguilar to keep it elevated and stop using it to brace against walls when he stood up. Aguilar did what she said, partly because she said it as though non-compliance was not a category she had considered. Private Rodriguez had taken a ricochet fragment above his left ear, a small piece of stone rather than projectile, but it had bled extravagantly and frightened him. She cleaned it, closed it with 3 strips of medical tape rather than sutures, because the wound geometry didn't require them, and told Rodriguez, who was 20 and from a small town in Colorado where the worst injury he'd seen before this deployment was his older brother's motorcycle accident, that he would have a scar, and the scar would eventually stop being something he noticed. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because that's what happens," she said. She also kept looking out, not out the tent flap that was sealed against the wind, but at the map. Whenever she wasn't actively treating someone, she drifted back toward it. She would stand for a long time. 3 minutes, 5, looking at the circles. Rourke noticed. He was not sure why he noticed, except that most people in a situation like this became progressively more inward-looking as the hours passed. The sniper had that effect. He compressed your world down to the radius of where you felt safe, and that radius kept shrinking. The soldiers who weren't on duty were in their cots, low and horizontal, making themselves small. Private Castellano had taken to reading the same 3 pages of a paperback thriller over and over, not because she was processing them, Rourke suspected, but because the act of reading gave her eyes a sanctioned place to look that wasn't the walls. This woman kept looking out. On the second afternoon, 36 hours after she'd appeared, Rourke caught her standing at the map with a piece of string, holding it taut between 2 points, the ridge where Price had died and the valley coordinate directly south. "What are you doing?" he said. "Thinking." "About?" "The angles don't work," she said. She moved the string. Price was hit on the eastern perimeter. Ferris was 20 degrees further east, but Aldrich was almost dead west of where Ferris stood. She paused. 1 sniper, 3 positions, or 1 position and 3 very specific lines of sight cleared by wind gaps. Rourke looked at the map. He had been looking at it for 2 days. He had not drawn that connection. "Wind gaps?" he said. "Storm systems at altitude aren't uniform. There are corridors, valleys where the wind drops for seconds at a time. The duration varies depending on the terrain geometry, the storm track, and the barometric differential across the ridge." She set the string down. "If I were choosing a hide at this range, I would study those corridors. I would know which ones cleared and when. I would plan my shot windows around them." That's Rourke started. "That's what any competent precision shooter would do," she said. It was not a boast, it was a description of a technical standard. The problem isn't figuring out that he's doing it. The problem is figuring out which wind gap, which ridge, which hide position allows him to access 3 separate target lines without repositioning. She moved the string again, set one end on the eastern perimeter Price, drew it across to Ferris's position, extended it further, through Aldrich's position, and continued the line southeast into the valley. She held it there. Rourke looked at where the line intersected the valley. There was a ridge there, a secondary ridge behind the primary one that the reconnaissance maps had cataloged but tagged as non-tactical because of its distance. At the base of that secondary ridge, the contour line suggested a natural elevation break. "That's 3,000 meters, Rourke said. "At least," she said. The sound delay on Aldrich's shot. I was inside the medical bay, but the tent canvas moved before the echo reached us. That's at least 2,000 meters direct line, but the echo pattern suggested a deflection source. Something was bouncing the report. That means the actual hide isn't on the direct line, it's offset, using the terrain to scatter the acoustic signature. "You measured the tent canvas movement," Rourke said flatly. "I noticed it," she said. The distinction mattered to her, apparently. 2,000, maybe more, she said again, quietly. She went back to Greaves and a soldier with a broken finger. Private First Class Danny Kowalski was 23 years old and had a photograph taped inside his helmet liner of his younger sister holding a golden retriever puppy. He had shown Rourke the photo 4 days earlier, before the storm, when they were both in a good mood about nothing in particular. Kowalski was the fastest runner in the unit. He could cover 100 meters in 11 seconds flat on flat ground. He had been tasked with a crossing between the command tent and the supply cache, 40 meters of open ground during what they believed was a wind-driven low-visibility window that would protect him. He made it 31 meters. The shot came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Kowalski went down rolling, which saved his life. The round had hit his upper left shoulder and exited through muscle rather than bone or artery. He was screaming, but he was alive, and 2 soldiers dragged him back inside before another shot came. Only one shot came. Webb stood in the center of the tent with the expression of a man who has been solving the same equation for 3 days and keeps arriving at an answer that cannot be right. "Estimate," he said, talking to no one in particular, talking to the problem. "We've got nothing, sir," said Sergeant Hawkins. "No thermal." "No, I said estimate. We can't estimate without a position." "Then find me a position." Silence. The woman Claire was working on Kowalski, her hands moving with the compressed efficiency Rourke had come to recognize in her. Pressure dressing, clean entry point check. Her face was calm in the way that was not the same as peaceful. It was the calm of someone who had chosen to file the panic somewhere out of reach because they needed both hands. When Kowalski was stable, she straightened. She looked at Webb. "He fired during a 12-second wind gap," she said, beginning at approximately 14:32. "If you look at your meteorological log from the last 72 hours and find the wind drop events, you'll see a pattern. He's not firing randomly inside the storm. He's using it." Webb looked at her. "He's using the storm," she said again, "the same way you'd use a suppressor. He waits for the ambient noise to drop. He takes the shot, and the storm restores concealment before you can triangulate. And you know this," Webb said, "because you're a volunteer medic." "I know this," she said, "because I'm looking at the problem." Webb's expression did not soften, but something shifted in it, a slight rearrangement, as if a calculation had been briefly interrupted and then resumed on different terms. "Get out of my operational space," he said. She went back to Kowalski. 0100 hours. The storm had not broken. It had deepened, somehow, which the meteorological instruments said was impossible given the pressure systems involved, and which the mountain did not care about. Rourke sat with his back against the supply crates and looked at the map. He'd been looking at it for 2 hours. He had written down the timestamps of every confirmed shot. He had cross-referenced them with the wind log that Corporal Aguilar maintained because Aguilar was obsessive about documentation. He had tried to find a pattern. He had found something. Or he thought he had. But he needed someone to tell him whether what he'd found was real or whether he was tired and projecting order onto chaos. He found her sitting in the medical bay, not sleeping, her back against the wall, her eyes open. She was looking at the same distance as always, that horizon behind everything, the one only she could see. "The wind drops," Rourke said. "I looked at them. The pattern isn't random." She said nothing. Every shot happened within 90 seconds of a recorded low-wind event, but the low-wind events follow a cycle. They're not perfectly regular, but they're clustered. Every 4 to 6 hours, there's a window that lasts longer than 2 minutes. She looked at him. "The next one," Rourke said, "is in about 3 hours. Based on the cycle." She held his gaze for a long moment. "And," she said, "and," Rourke said, carefully, "I need someone to tell me whether that means what I think it means." "It means he'll have a window," she said. "Whether he uses it depends on whether he has a target, so we don't give him a target. You've been trying that for 2 days." "No," Rourke said. "We've been hiding from him. That's different from not giving him a target." She was quiet for a long time. "He's been in that hide for at least 72 hours, she said finally. "In those temperatures, at that altitude, that's not a comfortable position. He's cold. He's been rationing movement. His fingers are probably borderline functional." She paused. "He's patient. But he's not comfortable. And impatient people, even patient people who are uncomfortable, they start making small adjustments." "Small adjustments," Rourke said. He shifted slightly between Ferris and Aldrich. The angles changed by about 4 degrees. "That's not a position change, that's settling. Repositioning weight." He's been in the same hide the entire time. The silence in the medical bay was different from the silence in the command tent. Less pressurized. "Give me a rifle," she said. She said it the way you say something that you've been deciding for a long time and have only just finished deciding. Rourke looked at her. "I'm a volunteer medic," she said. "I can't authorize my own use of weapons. You'd have to take it to Webb. He'll say no." "He might," she said. "That's his decision." Webb said no. He said it in the way that senior officers sometimes said no, not loudly, not with anger, but with the weight of institutional certainty. The kind that doesn't invite a second question. He said it while looking at a topographical map of the valley and not at Rourke, which was a deliberate choice. "She's a civilian," he said. "A volunteer. We have no verification of who she is, what her training is, or why she walked up a north face in a Category 3 mountain storm to reach a combat position. Any of those 3 things alone would be enough to say no. Together they constitute, sir. This was Sergeant Hawkins, from the corner, in a voice that Rourke had never heard from him. Low, strange. Sir, I need you to look at something. Webb turned. Hawkins was looking at the woman, not at her face. At her left forearm, where her sleeve had ridden up when she set her medical bag down. On the inside of her left forearm, faded to the gray-green of old military ink, was a small tattoo. 2 words in block capitals, a designation, a unit name, Echo Zero. Rourke read it. Read it again. It did not mean anything to him immediately, but Hawkins had gone completely still. Sergeant, Webb said. Hawkins's voice, when it came, was careful. He was choosing words the way you choose footholds on ice. Echo Zero was a Tier 1 designated marksman program, Hawkins said. Black program, no formal record in the standard database. I heard about it from a friend in Joint Special Operations. They ran 1 cohort, maybe 8 operators starting around 12 years ago. He paused. The program was dissolved after a mission in the Thar. I heard they lost most of the team. Webb was looking at the tattoo. The woman had not pulled her sleeve down. She was not performing anything. She stood with her arm at her side, the ink visible, and waited. That program, Hawkins said, slower now, produced what people in certain circles called the best cold-bore shooter alive. Single confirmed kill at over 4,000 meters. No spotter, no ranging assistance. 1 shot. He stopped. I never knew the name. The program kept identity off the books. The tent was very quiet. Outside, the storm pressed against the walls. Webb looked at the woman for a long time. Something moved across his face that was not quite recognition and not quite apology. It was the expression of a man revising a significant assumption. 4,000 meters, he said. 4,211, she said. Cold bore. Crosswind at 18 knots. Elevation differential of 600 meters. She paused. The target was stationary. This one will be 2 by now. He's been in that hide too long to be otherwise. You dissolved with the program, Webb said. According to Hawkins. According to Hawkins, she agreed. That was the intent. Another silence. What happened to your team? Webb said. The question was not unkind, but it was direct. Webb was a direct man, sometimes to his detriment. The woman did not answer immediately. We made an error in extraction sequencing, she said, finally. 3 days in the field instead of 2. A supply route that was clean when we entered and wasn't when we left. She looked at a point somewhere past Webb's shoulder. I was the last one out. That's why they called us Echo Zero. Echo for mountain acoustics, that was the core of the methodology. Zero for she stopped. For the remaining strength of the team. Echo for the mountains. Zero for what was left. No one said anything. Webb looked at Rourke. Rourke looked at Hawkins. Hawkins was looking at the floor. Give her a rifle, Webb said. His voice was level. Whatever she asks for. She asked for a 338 Lapua. They had one. Sergeant Price had been the unit's designated marksman before she was killed, and her weapon was in the case under her cot, cleaned and ready, which said something about Price that made Rourke's chest hurt when he thought about it too long. She also asked for the full meteorological log, every wind reading for the past 72 hours, the exact timestamps and body positions of every casualty, a compass, a piece of chalk. She got all of these things. For the next 90 minutes, she sat at the map table with the meteorological log and worked backward. She did not do this loudly. She did not narrate her process. She moved through the data with the focused quietness of someone doing arithmetic in their head, and occasionally she would make a small mark on the map overlay. Rourke watched from across the tent. She had declined a spotter. Webb had offered 2 candidates, both experienced, both steady, and she had declined without explanation. Private Maria Castellano, who was 20 and had grown up in a house where her father kept the television on at maximum volume at all times, finally said aloud what several people were thinking. Is she going to tell us what she's figured out, or does she just sort of do it? The woman looked up from the map. I'll tell you one thing, she said. He's not at the position on your overlay. He's 400 meters northeast of that, at the base of the second ridgeline. There's a rock formation there, granite shelf, natural concavity. It reads as shadow on satellite imagery, which is why nobody flagged it. But in a storm system that moves predominantly southwest to northeast, that shelf puts him directly in a wind shadow corridor. She pointed to a location on the map. Rourke looked. He could see it now, the way the contour lines suggested a natural hollow. He had looked at those lines 100 times. You worked that out from the meteorological log? He said. I worked it out from the echo delay on Aldrich's shot, she said. The log confirmed it. She went back to the data. 40 minutes before the estimated window, she put on her outer layers. She checked the rifle with the methodical focus of someone running through a sequence they have run so many times that it requires no conscious thought, only the absence of error. She checked the wind outside the tent flap. She held her bare hand in the air for 30 seconds, then drew it back. "Still cycling," she said. "The window will open on schedule." She established her position at the northeastern edge of the FOB perimeter, in a shallow depression that Rourke would not have chosen, too exposed on the left flank, too little overhead cover, but which, he realized after a moment, had one specific advantage. It sat directly in the center of the wind shadow formed by the generator housing and the supply cache, which together created a micro-environment with 30% lower wind variance than the surrounding open area. She had seen that in 30 seconds. Webb stood 40 meters back, inside the command tent, watching through binoculars. This was not useful. The storm denied visibility at that range, but he did it anyway. It seemed important to him to be watching. Rourke was closer. He had asked, and she had not said no. He crouched 8 meters behind and to her right, where she could ignore him. He understood instinctively that the important thing was not to be a presence she had to manage. He tucked himself against the supply cache wall and pulled his collar up and breathed through his nose and was as close to nothing as he could manage. She was prone, stock against her shoulder, cheek to the comb. She was not moving. This was the thing he would remember most afterward, not the shot, not the silence that followed the shot, but the stillness of her before it. She was as unmoving as the rock formations she had been studying. The storm moved around her. Snow built on the back of her parka in a thin crust, and she did not shift to dislodge it. Her legs were perfectly flat. Her support hand, under the forestock, was absolutely still in a way that suggested not rigid tension, but the deeper stillness of something that had been allowed to settle. There is a difference between a person holding still and a person who has become still. Rourke had seen both. He had been in sniper hides with trained shooters who held their stillness through effort. You could sense the suppressed fidget, the micro-corrections, the effort of the body resisting its own impulses. What he was looking at was the other kind. She had not suppressed anything. She had simply been there long enough, in the right internal state, that the stillness was what remained. Her left hand was bare. She had removed the glove. She held it, palm down, 2 inches off the snow, at 6-second intervals, reading the surface wind, cross-referencing it against something internal, some model she had built from 3 days of data and whatever was left of the methodology that had died with her team in a desert 3,000 kilometers from here. The surface wind at this elevation behaved differently from the wind at the hide's altitude. She was building a translation, reading what she could touch and converting it into what she could only calculate. Rourke watched the second hand of his watch. She had told him the window would open when the atmospheric pressure cycle completed. She had estimated the time to within 90 seconds. The window would last between 90 seconds and 4 minutes depending on whether the storm tracked north or northwest. Inside the tent, he knew, Aguilar was watching the barometric instruments. Hawkins was on the enemy frequency channel with his headphones clamped down. Webb was standing at the window slit with binoculars that couldn't see anything useful but that he wouldn't put down. Castellano was, probably, reading the same 3 pages. The storm moved. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds past her estimated window open time, her left hand went flat. Completely flat. Rourke stopped breathing. She said, very quietly, "He's settling. He knows the window is open." "How can you?" Rourke started. "He knows the same thing I know," she said. "He's been watching the same storm for 3 days. He's the best asset his side has, or they wouldn't have sent him to this altitude. He's cold and tired, and he has a window, and he's going to use it." She did not take her eye from the scope. Every precision shooter at long range has a tell before the shot. It's not visible from outside, it's internal, a kind of settling into intention, but the physical world reflects it in small ways. Wind readers pick it up in the micro-turbulence changes. "I'm a wind reader." She paused. "Suang-i." The rifle was still. The storm was still. Nothing moved for 11 seconds. Rourke had been in combat. He had been in moments of compressed time, the kind where a second stretched wide enough to walk around in, and he had thought he understood what that felt like. He understood now that he had been approximating. What happened in those 11 seconds was not stretched time. It was time briefly emptied of everything except the shot that had not yet happened. He thought, for no reason he could explain, about Kowalski's photograph, the golden retriever puppy, the younger sister. He thought about Aldrich walking between tents with his head down, doing everything right. He thought about Price on the eastern perimeter, checking the wire at dawn, and how Price had been the kind of soldier who checked the wire at dawn because she knew that someone had to. 3 people, 3 lives that had ended in the time it took a piece of metal to cross a distance that was itself almost incomprehensible, a distance longer than most people could see clearly on a good day, in good light, from a fixed position. Cross that distance, in the middle of a mountain storm. Someone had been precise enough to be lethal 3 times, and now the person who was going to answer that precision was lying in the snow with a bare left hand reading the wind. She did not count down, she did not telegraph, she did not do anything that Rourke could name as a preparatory action. There was no visible inhalation, no adjustment, no final alignment. The stillness before the shot and the shot itself were separated by nothing he could identify as a transition. The report was enormous in the white silence, and then the storm swallowed it whole. The sound hit the mountains and came back, changed, fractured, scattered, turned into echo. Which was, Rourke understood suddenly, the entire point of the methodology. Echo, the mountains as a medium, a system of reading and responding that used the terrain's own acoustic properties to locate, track, and engage. The thing that had given the program its name. The brass casing clicked against the snow. She did not move. She held her position for 30 seconds, then 40. Her eye remained at the scope. Her support hand did not shift. She lay in the snow on the northeastern edge of FOB Kestrel at an altitude of 4,200 meters in a storm that had killed 4 people in the last 4 days, and she waited, with the patience of someone who has learned that the thing you most want to confirm is the thing you must be most careful to verify. Then she worked the bolt slow, controlled, the way you work a bolt when you are not in a hurry, because you are only going to need 1 round, and extracted the spent casing and set it in her palm, and closed her hand around it. The radio behind Rourke, which had been on the open enemy frequency channel since she established her position, a long shot at interception, but she had asked for it, produced a burst of static. Then, voices, urgent, compressed, not in English, 3 voices, possibly 4, speaking in rapid overlapping bursts that Rourke could not parse but whose register he recognized, the register of people responding to a sudden problem, the register of people who had expected something to happen and it had happened in the wrong direction. Then, silence, a different silence. Rourke had been in enough operational contexts to understand the difference between the silence of nothing happening and the silence of something having happened. The first kind is waiting. The second kind is a held breath, a collective recalibration, the moment between the thing that occurred and the understanding of what it means. This was the second kind. She exhaled. It was a small sound, controlled, not a sigh of relief. There was nothing relieved about it. It was the exhalation of someone completing a physical task that required full respiratory management, releasing the last of the breath they had been managing for the past 11 seconds, plus the 30 seconds of hold, plus the 40 seconds of verification. 3,842 meters, she said. Adjusted for the ridge deflection, approximately 3,100 meters line of sight. The rest was vertical angle and wind. She paused. He positioned himself for the long approach and counted on the range being outside our response capability. He was right about that. She was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than the silence after the shot. He was a good operator, she said. He chose his hide well. He read the storm correctly. He understood the terrain in a way that most people who look at a topographical map would not. He waited. She set the spent casing in the snow next to the rifle. The brass caught the pale light and gleamed for a moment before the cold took it. He just didn't know I was here. She began to break down her position. Inside the tent, when they got the confirmation, a careful reconnaissance of the enemy position 3 hours later, when the storm began to thin, confirmed a single occupant, confirmed inactive. The reaction was the kind that Rourke had seen in combat units before. Not celebration, exactly, but a sudden exhaling of something that had been held at maximum compression for too long. Castellano made a noise that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and covered her mouth. Aguilar put his hands over his face. Hawkins sat down very suddenly, like his legs had made a unilateral decision. Webb stood straight and said nothing. She was in the medical bay. Rourke found her there, sitting against the wall again, in the same position as before. The rifle was cleaned and back in its case under Price's cot. "You should eat something," Rourke said. "I know. Greaves has. I know." She looked at her hands. "Give me a minute." He sat down across from her, back against the opposite wall. He did not say anything. He understood, in some way he couldn't fully articulate. That silence was what was required. After a while, she said, there were 7 of us in Echo Zero, the actual operational team, not the support personnel, 7 shooters who went through the full methodology, the acoustic triangulation, the cold bore certification, the extended isolation protocols. She spoke carefully, like someone reading from a document they have memorized but still find painful to hear out loud. We were in the field for 11 days on the Thar extraction. The intelligence on the route was bad, not wrong in a way that was obvious wrong in the way that only reveals itself when you're already inside it. Rourke waited. We lost the first 2 on day 9, she said. An ambush at a dry riverbed. We lost 2 more getting through it. And then, she stopped. We were in a bad place by then. 3 people down, compromised route, communications degraded. The commander made the decision to push to the secondary extraction point rather than hold for pickup. He was right to make it. The math supported it. But, Rourke said, but the math didn't account for the fact that we'd been moving for 72 hours on 2 hours of sleep, and the secondary point was at 1,400 meters of elevation above our position. She looked at the wall. 2 more didn't make the climb. Altitude and exhaustion and a firefight at the 800-meter mark. She paused. I was the last one. I reached the extraction point alone. They pulled me out. She turned her hands over, palms up, and looked at them. 6 people. The program designed a methodology that produced 7 of the best precision shooters in a generation. And the only thing the methodology couldn't account for was that people get tired. The heater ticked. Outside, the storm was still moving, though something in it had changed, a slight softening, a degree less pressure, like a fist slowly unclenching. Why did you come here? Rourke said. The humanitarian work, the volunteer ID. Because I'm good at trauma medicine, she said, simply. And I needed something to do that was. She paused, looking for a word. Legible. After the program, after everything. I needed work where the objective was clearly to prevent harm rather than to inflict it, even if the line is blurrier than that in practice. You hadn't shot since? Rourke said. She said nothing for a moment. I shoot every week, she said. I'll shoot every week for the rest of my life. The skill doesn't go away and I don't want it to. I'm not. She stopped again. I'm not broken. I want to be clear about that. I made a choice, coming up that north face, the same way I make every choice. Deliberately. She looked at him. Your unit needed help. I had the capability to provide it. The humanitarian credential is real. So is everything else. What's your real name? Rourke said. She looked at him with something that might have been amusement, or the memory of it. Claire, she said. That's your real name. That's what I use, she said, which was not the same thing. The storm broke at 0600 the following morning. Not gradually, not apologetically the way a storm in that range of the mountains sometimes breaks, like a confession long overdue. Sudden and complete. The sky went from white to pale gray to a blue so cold it almost had a sound to it. The peaks returned. The valley below the FOB was visible for the first time in 4 days. There was a lot of wreckage in it. The medevac window opened at 0830. 3 helicopters came in, 2 for the wounded, 1 bringing supplies and a forensic team to document the enemy sniper's position. The pilots were professionally nonplussed by everything. The way military aviators learn to be when their job consists of landing in places that are technically inhospitable. Webb stood at the edge of the landing pad and watched the helicopters come in. He had not slept. He looked like a man who had spent the night revising something he'd believed for a long time. Kowalski was loaded onto the medevac with the quiet efficiency of a medical team that had done this 10,000 times. He grabbed Rourke's arm as they lifted him onto the stretcher and said, "Tell her," and then seemed to realize he didn't have a sentence for it. "Just tell her," he said. Rourke told him he would. He went to find her. She was not in the medical bay. She was not in the command tent. She was not at the perimeter. Hawkins found Rourke outside the northwest edge of the FOB, staring at the snow. The north face, Hawkins said. There were footprints leading away from the tent line, northwest, following a line along the ridge that curved toward the route she'd come up. The storm had been breaking for an hour, and the prints were clear, compact, evenly spaced, the gait of someone moving at a deliberate pace. They were already filling with wind-driven snow. She didn't say anything to Greaves, Hawkins said. Just cleaned her equipment, checked his supplies, made a note in the medical log of everything she'd used and where he could request resupply. He said she was thorough. He paused. He said she apologized for not having more morphine. Rourke looked at the prints. They went perhaps 100 meters before the snow took them back. No contact information, Hawkins said. No documentation of how she arrived. No record of her departure. What about the humanitarian organization on her credential? Rourke said. I ran it through the SAT-link when we got signal back this morning. The organization is real. The credential ID she carries appears in their volunteer database. Hawkins paused. The entry date is 4 years ago. The contact information she listed resolves to a postal address in a small city in the Swiss Alps. Did you try the address? There's a hostel there, Hawkins said. The manager doesn't remember anyone by that description staying there long enough to call it a residence. Another pause. He did say they get a lot of climbers. Rourke looked at the mountains. The blue sky above them was absolute now, the kind of blue that has no depth because it contains everything. The valley below glittered with light off fresh snow. At the far end of the valley, barely visible, was the eastern ridge where the enemy sniper's hide had been a dark notch in the granite, already being photographed and documented by the forensic team. Webb appeared beside Rourke. He stood for a moment and looked at the prints. He stood that way for a long time. Rourke did not fill the silence. He had learned from Aldrich, who had been a patient teacher of the informal kind, that some silences belong to the person generating them and that filling them is a form of theft. I want to say something, Webb said finally, and I want you to understand that I'm aware of how insufficient it is. Sir, Rourke said. I was wrong, Webb said. About her. In a categorical way. Not just in the immediate assessment, I was wrong in the framework I applied. I looked at her and assigned her a value based on appearance and context. I did that without, he stopped, without the information that would have made a different assessment possible. The information wasn't available, sir, Rourke said. That's true, Webb said. And it's also true that I made the error before I determined whether the information was available. He looked at the prints. A good officer doesn't do that. A good officer suspends the assessment until the data is in. I didn't do that. I made a judgment at zero data and treated it as though the data confirmed it. He was quiet for a moment. Price was the same way, he said. When Price arrived in the unit 3 years ago, she was 24 and 90 pounds lighter than the average male in the platoon, and I noted it. I noted it and filed it as a data point, and I was wrong to do that too, which she demonstrated about 14 times before she died. He stopped. I keep learning the same lesson. Rourke looked at the prints in the snow and thought about Price on the eastern perimeter at dawn, doing the check because she knew someone had to. He thought about what her file said, which he had read after she died. 2 commendations for bravery under fire, a specialist qualification in long-range reconnaissance, a note from a previous commanding officer that read, simply, best instincts in the field of anyone I've commanded. She had been 27 years old. He thought about the rifle in its case under Price's cot. The woman had picked it up and used it and cleaned it and put it back. The precision that Price had maintained, had carried into the field and died with, had passed for a few hours to someone else who had used it well. There was something in that transfer that Rourke could not fully articulate but could feel the shape of a kind of continuity that had nothing to do with records or citations or names on a board. Rourke said nothing. Webb did not seem to require a response to this. He was making a record of something, for his own purposes, and the record needed to be spoken aloud. Do you know who she is? Webb said after a moment, not asking about the tattoo, not about Echo Zero, asking the actual question. No, sir, Rourke said. Neither do I, Webb said. And I don't think we're meant to. Private Castellano came up beside them. She was 20, and she had grown up in the loud house, and she had a habit of saying the thing that everyone else was thinking but had learned not to say. Who was she? Castellano said. Hawkins looked at the mountains. Nobody, he said. A volunteer. She walked up a north face in a Category 3 storm alone, Castellano said. Yes, Hawkins said, and she made a shot at 3,800-something meters in a whiteout. Yes. Castellano was quiet for a moment. That's not nobody, she said. No, Hawkins said. It's not. He kept looking at the mountains. But I think that's the point. The people who do this kind of work, the ones who are really doing it, they're not supposed to be somebody. Being somebody means there's a record, and a record means there's a target, and a target means the next time they walk up a north face to help someone who needs it, the help doesn't arrive. Castellano thought about this. So she just keeps going, she said. I imagine so, Hawkins said. The wind moved across the ridge. The last of her prints, the deepest and most sheltered ones, lasted another moment before the snow covered them completely. The helicopter blades were audible in the valley, now a second resupply run, the sound of the world re-engaging with the mountain after 4 days of silence. Rourke watched the prints disappear and thought about the logic of absence, how some things only exist in their effect, how a shot fired in a whiteout, from a position no one could have confirmed, against a target at a range no one had believed possible, had changed everything, had given 41 people their lives back, had restored a supply corridor, had ended 4 days of terror, and the person who had done it was already 300 meters up a north face, moving away from the thing she had done as though distance from it was the only payment she required. He thought about what she had said in the medical bay. The skill doesn't go away and I don't want it to. And earlier, without saying it directly, I came here because you needed help, and I could provide it. That is the entirety of the calculation. There was something in that economy that Rourke could not fully grasp but could feel the weight of the simplicity of it, and the cost underneath the simplicity. 7 people went in, 1 came out. The one who came out had spent 4 years finding work where the objective was clearly to prevent harm. And when the harm required a different kind of prevention, she climbed a mountain in a blizzard with a medical bag and a piece of duct tape on her parka and waited until someone gave her a rifle. And then she left. No name on the official record, no after-action citation, no photograph, only the shell casing in the snow, which one of the junior privates would find 3 hours later and would keep for reasons he could not explain, and the faint impression in the medical log where her handwriting neat, compressed, economical listed the supplies she had used and where they could be replaced. And in the corner of the page, in the same handwriting, a single line that was not a supply note. Greaves is good. Trust him. That was all. The helicopters came in. The mountain kept its silence. And somewhere on the north face, moving at a steady pace through clean air and new snow, a figure in a patched parka descended toward the valley floor, and whatever came next, another medical credential, another crisis somewhere. Another mountain that needed climbing, carrying what she always carried. The weight of what the methodology had cost, the precision that had survived it, and the understanding that the best thing you can do with a skill that the world doesn't know you have is to use it when the world most needs it and then disappear before the world decides what to do with you. Echo for the mountains, 0 for what remain.